Okay, welcome everyone to Gaza in Context, a collaborative teach-in series that is starting today, right now, and will continue weekly until such time that we deem fit. This is the first installment under the title Gaza 101. It is a series of teach-ins on the topic on Gaza, but in context. And it is supported and co-organized by 15 institutions. I'll share them very quickly. Arab Studies Institute, Georgetown University Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, George Mason University's Middle East and Islamic Studies Program, Rutgers Center for Middle Eastern Studies, Birzeit University, Harvard Center for Middle Eastern Studies, Brown University Center for Middle East Studies, University of Chicago Center for Contemporary Theory, Brown University's New Directions in Palestine Studies, Georgetown University Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, Simon Fraser University's Center for Comparative Muslim Studies, Georgetown University, Qatar, American University of Cairo's Alternative Policy Studies, Middle East Studies Global Academy, and University of Chicago's Middle Eastern Studies Center. Thank you all for being with us. We have an illustrative group of speakers. This is a bit crowded, we understand, but this is intended to be a launching meeting in which we address the basic background and maybe say a few words coming from everybody involved who are essentially representing the institutions that are participating. And we have with us Ziad Aburish, Fida Adli, Asli Bali, Rana Barakat, Rochelle Davis, Beshara Doumani, Noor Ariqat, Adil Iskandar, Maya Migdashi, Shireen Sayeli, Lisa Widin, Rabab Al-Mahdi, and potentially others, and some who have actually decided to join may be coming in a bit later. If I forgot any of the speakers or the organizers, please let me know. I will not say very much. I'll be moderating the event. My name is Bassam Haddad. The one thing I'd like to say is one of the main reasons we're doing this is because of the appalling discourse of government. Governments usually do that, especially during war, but also the abrogation of the mainstream media's job of checking power instead of reinforcing it. And unfortunately, the disappointing position in many universities by the leaderships in failing to protect their own community and student body by producing one-sided statements that actually belie what is happening on the ground. So with that, let me just thank everybody who is joining us today. Starting next week, we will have a much smaller group of people addressing different topics related to the question of Gaza in context. And I will actually avoid thanking a lot of people now because we can do this towards the end. We would like to start with Noor Ariqat, who actually effectively directed the documentary we are about to see a clip of. And right after she introduces it, we'll go to the documentary. And then we have an order in which the speakers will speak. What follows, Noura, will be the documentary, and then Beshara Doumani, and then I'll call upon you to join in when your turn is up. So with that, let me say that I will not introduce people's bios. Everything is online on Jadaliyya.com. You will see the post with everyone's names hyperlinked if you'd like to learn more about who's speaking. And we will also be publishing a much more extensive post that includes all this information shortly after the feed. Thank you all for joining again. Noura, it's all you.
Thank you, Bassam. Thank you to everyone here. I want to just actually start by sharing something really personal, which is that it's really uplifting to be in this space with you all. We haven't been able to be in a space, I personally haven't been able to be in a space with others in a very harrowing moment. At the moment that there is genocidal warfare, almost with zealously supported by European and Western capitals, we have tried to grieve, have not had space to grieve. We are also forced to step up to the front line on multiple fronts to protect our students, to organize with faculty, to respond to the media, to be out in these streets, to connect with our families, to make sure that our friends are well. And so this really is a time where, in the precise moment that we're fighting against crude dehumanization, paving of Palestinians, paving the pathway to mass atrocities against them, we are also, in the extraction of our labor and our time, have also not been able to fully show up in our humanity with one another. And so I just want to say thank you to you all, and for the space that we can have together, and especially to the people and the feminist practice that has insisted upon rest. So here, thank you, Shireen and Rana and Maya, and Asle, and also Ziad and Bassam, and everyone here who has insisted upon that. And so let me start with that. As to what we're here for and the offering that's being made in terms of weekly teach-ins, what we're going to start with here is part of a film that I co-directed and worked on with a team in the aftermath of the 51-day onslaught against Gaza and the captive Palestinian population in Gaza, I should say, in 2014. That was the third large-scale onslaught since 2008. That was the 22nd onslaught since Israel began its unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2004, where it began to expand its northern and southern military buffer zones, further shrinking the Gaza Strip and essentially taking more Palestinian land without Palestinians on it. We found that by 2014, the media had started to slightly shift from its framing in 2008, but that even with that slight opening where it started to have Palestinians, where it wouldn't just berate them, which we're seeing again now on television, that despite that, we couldn't get past the premise. We couldn't get past the premise that this was our fault. We couldn't get past the premise, as Edward Said reminds us in the aftermath of the 82 invasion of Lebanon, that Palestinians have a homeland worth fighting for and a freedom struggle that they are a part of. And so this film was made as an offering, as a pedagogical tool then, as a 20-minute film broken up into 4 parts that's accompanied by a bibliography with 110 entries just on Gaza, books, articles, essays, right? Films just on Gaza, as well as teaching guides for each of the 4 parts, because this material exists. We have been producing this literature. The knowledge on it exists. It's not about a vacuum for it, despite now the taxing extraction imposed upon us to present the narrative once again. It's there. People need to study it. And so this film was made in part to make it easier to consume. At the time, people encouraged me to make it shorter so it would go viral. And our team insisted that it had to live on as a pedagogical tool. And unfortunately, we're seeing that it's still necessary. And what we're going to show right now is just one part, and it's the part that addresses the dehumanizing, crude, very racist talking point that this is about Hamas. And so we take that head on to insist that this is not about Hamas, this is not about Gaza, that this is about Palestine, and that this continues to be a war against Palestinians in full, and insisting on contextualizing Gaza within a settler colonial, the broader settler colonial framework that marks Palestinians from removal, and the indigenous framework that insists on our remaining. And so, Sam, I
got it.
With that.
Yes, thank you so much, Shari. The people I love, Noura. Let me start right now and move to the video. Here we go. Trying to show only. Can everybody see this? Can I get confirmation?
Not for a lack of trying. It concentrates Palestinians from the perimeter and maintains their subjugation with repeated military campaigns, euphemistically known as mowing the lawn. For a lack of trying, despite the different approaches, the outcome is the same. Israel controls the greatest amount of Palestinian land with the least number of Palestinians and concentrates the greatest number of Palestinians on the least amount of fragmented lands. Would Israel pursue warfare in the Gaza Strip rather than use its West Bank policy for displacement and control? There, it outsources security to Palestinian forces and foots the bill to international donors. Because Israel wants the West Bank. Its religious claims there are more pronounced. It desires control of the Western Aquifer, one of the most significant sources of water in the region. And it wants to control the easternmost border, the Jordan Valley. In contrast, Israel doesn't want the Gaza Strip. By 2005, Israel only had 8,000 settlers in the Gaza Strip compared to 400,000 in the West Bank. It considers Gaza a cancer.
The Strip has always been a hotbed of popular resistance, well before Hamas's establishment. Israel has repeatedly tried and failed to suppress the population using violence as well as co-optation strategies.
Since the early 90s, Israel has set Gaza apart from the rest of the conflict and pursued a policy of isolation, de-development, and control. As early as 1993, Shimon Peres told a UNESCO conference that he saw the Gaza Strip progressively evolving into a Palestinian state, while the West Bank becomes an autonomous polity of Palestinians and Israeli settlers whose status and borders would eventually be defined. In preparation for a peace deal ending the first Intifada, Israel imported foreign labor to replace its Palestinian labor force. Together with the impact of the first Gulf War, the economic downturn in the Gaza Strip was severe. In March 1993, Israel imposed a complete closure of Gaza, which was never fully lifted again. By this time, the Gazan economy was already dependent on Israel and incapable of self-sustenance. 9 months later, Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization signed the Oslo Accords on the White House lawn. In 1993, Israel had made Gaza dependent, announced an intention to transform it into the Palestinian state, and had sealed it off. All of this without a single rocket or a single suicide attack. Hamas launched its first suicide attack on April 7th, 1994, in retaliation for the murder of 29 Palestinians praying in the Ibrahim Mosque in Hebron. 2 years later, Benjamin Netanyahu assumed office and explicitly opposed the peace process. The peace process crumbled. 4 years after that, it set off the second Palestinian Intifada. In this context, Hamas launched its first mortar into Israel in March 2001. In April 2004, then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon proposed complete withdrawal from Gaza in exchange for consolidation and control of the settlements in the West Bank. Unilateral disengagement in 2005 realized Israel's vision articulated by Shimon Peres in 1993. In the 18 months between Sharon's proposal and the execution, Israel launched 8 military campaigns
that expanded the northern and southern buffer zones between the Gaza Strip and Israel and assassinated several Hamas political and military leaders.
Those campaigns have never stopped. Together with the naval blockade and the land siege, the Gaza Strip has become a zone of death. Rocket fire and Hamas.
All right, we're going to stop here with the promise that we will actually be screening the whole film with subtitles, and we're trying to get subtitles in Arabic as well. I think we might have that already, and we will announce that later. So let's move on to the next speaker. And let me just say that I would like to share that a sound, an innocent sound, will come up at around 4 minutes, so that you could wrap up. This is for everybody, so that, you know, I don't interrupt you while speaking directly. I'll also try to make the time out sign, but then I'll go to the sound. Beshara, it's all you, and you have screen sharing rights.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bassam. I'll try to be quick. I'm going to share the screen with you, doing a timeline of Gaza, some of which has already been covered. But I want to step back a little bit, first introduce myself. Beshara Doumani, I'm a professor of history at Brown University. I'm the Mahmoud Chair, Mahmoud Darwish Professor of Palestinian Studies and founder of the New Directions of Palestinian Studies. And I'm also happy to say that the Center for Middle East Studies at Brown University is part of this consortium. I want to I don't know, can you see the screen well? Somebody can confirm, maybe?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I'll try to make it a little bit bigger if I can figure out how. And okay, well,
There is a yes, right there.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
So this is a quick timeline. While this may not be new to most of you, I'm told this is a teach-in, so I just wanted to put it out there. You can take a second to look at it. I want to make 6 points about Gaza by way of contributing to historically informed discussion. The 6 points are: I considered Gaza to be a quote-unquote pure product of 1948, settler colonial, of course, as both an event and a structure. Gaza is a cauldron of Palestinian political movements from PLO to Hamas. It's a pivot point for transformative events. It's a historical archive of destruction and renewal. It's a generative of new forms of agency for Palestinians. And its condition under siege, especially, is a kind of a canary in the mine of global challenges we're all facing. We're not going to be able to cover all these points, but there'll be time in future teach-ins. What do I mean? It's a pure product of 1948. Number one, I mean, this was a moment in which the Gaza Strip was actually created as a separate geographical entity, but different from all other geographical entities in historic Palestine. It's a stateless geography. It was never annexed like the West Bank was for Jordan. It remained under Egyptian control 1949 to 67, but it remained with a kind of a totally stateless condition. Number two, it's its demography was transformed. The overwhelming majority of people living in Gaza today are refugees in 1948. The population of Gaza was transformed after 48, giving them the majority. There are a number of camps that still officially exist, but of course, the refugee population is spread out all over the Gaza Strip. And what I also mean is that the two basic components of the Palestinian experience of 1948, which were massacres and forced displacement, are things that have been visited upon Gaza more than any other place in historic Palestine over and over again. This is not to mention the caging and incarceration that you saw in the film earlier. It's generative, it's a cauldron of Palestinian political movements from PLO to Hamas. The three top leaders of Fatah, of course, Yasser Arafat in the middle, giving a speech at the United Nations in 1974, Salah Khalaf and Khalil al-Wazir, all were from Gaza. The last two were refugees in Gaza. Yasser Arafat was actually raised there. And they and many, many, many others from the Gaza Strip were really absolutely the backbone in many ways of the formation of the PLO. And at that time, of course, the PLO was a secular national movement that believed in armed struggle. Here's a picture of Che Guevara in Gaza in 1959. Gaza has a long history of being seen as a cradle, really, of anti-colonial movements. And of course, after the Israel-occupied Gaza in 1967, it was faced almost immediately due to that long history with an armed uprising and the Sharon's pacification, so-called, of Gaza in 1971 maybe have been forgotten by many people, but it was a really very important event of massive destruction, displacement that took place and would become in many ways a model for what would happen to Gaza over and over again. Of course, we know that the PLO and its leaders were dismissed as terrorists. We've heard all this before, and Israel succeeded in many ways of marginalizing the PLO after its invasion of Lebanon in 1982, and physically removing the leadership from the areas in or surrounding Palestine, and effectively putting an end to the question of armed struggle. This created a bit of a vacuum, and herein comes Gaza again. I was actually there on the day that the first Intifada, I was in Gaza, broke out. That became such a significant event that the word Intifada actually entered the English language. Gaza leadership in the beginning of the Intifada put a very important movement in a do or die situation. That movement was the Muslim Brotherhood, which until that time had rejected the idea of the establishment of a Palestinian state. It believed that Palestine belonged to the Islamic Ummah and it should not be turned into a particular state separate from that Ummah. And they fought very hard for that vision. And I was teaching at Birzeit and I lived through many, many events in which there were clashes between PLO supporters and Muslim Brotherhood supporters. The breakout of the Intifada in 1987 made it clear that there was a tsunami of public opinion among Palestinians that there should be a self-determination, end of occupation, establishment of a state. And the Muslim Brotherhood had to either go with the flow or end itself. And they decided to go with the flow, but step it up by of course, upping the ante on the PLO at the time, saying they want all of Palestine and resumption of armed struggle. And that is the beginning of Hamas, which its spiritual leader, Ahmed Ismail Yassin, who was a paraplegic, actually was very important. He was later assassinated by Israel, like much of the leadership of Hamas, just in many of the same ways they've always assassinated leadership of the PLO. Now, Gaza, as we've just seen, is a pivot for transformative events. That was the first intifada, but it was also very important for a second intifada, which is mostly associated with the West Bank, but it was really big in Gaza as well. And ever since that time, it seemed that in the West Bank, these intifadas always failed to dislodge the Israeli government. But in the case of Gaza, it actually, after a while, helped lead to a decision by the Israeli government to actually withdraw, dismantle its settlements from Gaza in 2005. And they did it in a particular way, of course, without any coordination with the Palestinian Authority in order to create a divide and conquer situation. The PA was effectively prevented from having a role in this disengagement and in ruling Gaza afterwards. And Israel and the United States asked for elections, thinking that this will bring a different kind of leadership that they can work with, but they were stunned, and I think most everybody was stunned that Hamas actually won in a landslide, and they refused to accept the results of the free parliamentary elections, and that led to a showdown between Hamas and Fatah in Gaza, in which Hamas took over Gaza, and now the divide and conquer strategy not only was political, it was also geographic. Hamas.
We might have to leave it at that.
Okay.
But
right.
we definitely need
fantastic.
a longer version another time if you are willing to join us with other speakers in a much smaller setting, or at least in terms of speakers, and maybe do a longer presentation. We would love that, actually.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Shukran. I'm very sorry to cut you off, and I'll be using the same ring going forward. Just know that it's not my phone ringing, it's me trying to signal you. So thanks again, Beshara, and I hope we can move forward with Rana Barakat from joining us from Birzeit University. Please feel free to introduce yourself in any which way you like, so that you could actually demonstrate or show or reveal which institution you're speaking from or speaking kind of on behalf of.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not speaking on behalf of Birzeit University. I just happen to be a professor
Great.
there. So I should say that from the very beginning. My name is Rana Barakat. I'll try to stick to the time, but I should say that it's been a long day here, and I wonder if anybody on the screen, I wonder if you guys remember what sleep is like. So I think we're all a bit frazzled. I'll try to make sense. I have to admit that I actually wanted to pass on speaking. I don't know why I didn't. I think maybe it was the hope of coming together, teaching, learning, whatever it is that we're doing, gathering is a political act. I don't think I have much analysis to offer in this very learned room. Everyone here knows about the history of settler colonialism on Palestine. Everyone here knows what colonialism is as violence. Everyone here probably knows that this war, which is part of a much longer history, but it also feels like none other before it. Everyone here knows that the Nakba is ongoing and has been going on for nearly a century. But this moment is happening so quickly, so brutally, with unseen violent levels of violence on Palestinian bodies that it almost feels new. Everyone here knows that transfer is also not new for Palestinians, but this is happening now, and people quite literally have nowhere to go. Everyone here knows that UNRWA tents are a part of our history, Palestinian history, but they're now going up in Khan Yunis and are a part of our new present. Everyone here knows all of this and so much more. This is clearly a genocidal war, but what we know is that it is also for us as Palestinians, what it has been since the onset of settler colonial invasion in Palestine. What it has to be is about liberation and our peoplehood. And we will continue to work because we belong to this land, and our love in this belonging can never be broken by their bombs. And as such, I guess I should speak from where I am, zooming into you from Ramallah in occupied Palestine. We here, like you, are watching Gaza, but it is not very far. I teach at Birzeit University, and we have now gone into remote teaching due to the war, partly because the West Bank is a maze and a minefield of settler army and an army of settlers. But it is also a site of hysterical genocide, same source, but a slightly different landscape. But also, partly our remote teaching is also because of a well over than a decade political reverse on the part of the quasi-leadership here in the West Bank. And my university seems to not want to be a political space like it can be, or I think should be. But what they want and what we are is very different. And so I will use this moment to read from a bayan, a statement put out by my union, Birzeit University Union of Professors and Employees in Occupied Palestine, dated October 11th, in the hopes that it can make clear from where I speak from and what we are trying to do every day here through this hysterical genocide. Where we wrote this from a week ago, a little over a week ago, is now ever changing, but hopefully will also remain relevant. The title is We Are All Palestinians, and I'm reading part of this. 2023 will be recorded historically as the year that Palestinians stood boldly in the face of colonial fascism and screamed in defense of their homes, humanity, and life. Palestinians as a people have endured over a century of settler colonial violence. We have thrived as a people and shall continue to do so. We do not need to speak of our right to resist, for it is not a right, but a way of being and survival for Palestinians. Zionism, the settler state, and the entire colonial system that is part of this fascist ideology can no longer falsely hide beneath the cloak of humanism. In Palestine in 2023, we do not demand our right to narrate. Our ability to narrate was never out of our hands, and resistance in all of its manifestations and forms do not need the pre-approval of static international codes. The oppressed do not need to claim authority over their own oppression. The ongoing events of history, our history, is what allows us this authority. We consider it our duty not to expose the bloody barbarism of Zionism. Their actions as a fascist state and a ruthless army are more than sufficient to undertake this task. It is our duty to record this moment, not as its victims, but as the people who will remember, record, survive, resist, and return. Our story will tell the story of these acts, not only as a record of colonial brutality, but also as a record of our bold-faced determination to live, resist, and return. We remain attached to our land and in our humanity as Palestinian Arabs. No need to prove our humanity to those who have lost theirs. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. We appreciate this. These are difficult and important words. I would like to move to invite Lisa Wedeen. And again, please, Lisa, feel free to introduce yourself.
I'm Lisa Wedeen from the University of Chicago, and I'm speaking as an individual and standing in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. Last week, the Chicago Center for Contemporary Theory, which I direct, hosted Professor Nadia Abul-Haj from Columbia, who made the important, if seemingly obvious, point that history did not begin with an unprecedented Hamas incursion into so-called Israel proper, in which, in addition to military personnel, hundreds of civilians were killed. Rather, we have to understand the massacre in terms of a history of occupation and apartheid rule. Making a plea for context is not the same as justifying brutality. Explanation is not the same as moral justification. Killing civilians is a war crime. You have to be able to recognize this fact while also understanding the corresponding brutality that gives rise to such violence. We have to be able to hold two judgments at the same time. Our political humanity depends on this level of nuance. And in that spirit, we need to situate the Hamas attack historically and politically, as my colleagues have already done. As many of you know, most Gazans are themselves refugees from the war of 1948, as Beshara said. More specifically, most Gazans are refugees from southern Palestine, that is, including the areas where the Hamas incursion took place. Those were Palestinian towns and villages prior to 1948. What's more, given that Gaza has been closed, that is, subjected to a military blockade since 2007, most Gazans alive today have never left the Strip. A blockade doesn't just mean that no one can leave, as Nadia Abul-Hajj also pointed out. It also means that the Israeli state controls what goes in: concrete, food, fuel, water, electricity. Half of the population of Gaza is under 18. They are, to use Francesca Albanese's words, children of the blockade and constant war. This is an open-air prison, by any measure illegal under international law, and it is an open-air prison that would not exist without the support of the global North. Apprehending this, really taking this in, means understanding what the system of dehumanization does. As Frantz Fanon pointed out in The Wretched of the Earth, the colonized internalizes the violence of the colonizer. And it is in the efforts of decolonization that the colonized vomits these values of oppression up in the form of yet more violence. Understanding violence as catharsis is not the same as endorsing it. Indeed, Fanon's account is deeply ambivalent. As he describes in his own extraordinary last substantive chapter, violence mangles both ruler and ruled. I want to turn quickly to the global North and to the question of what Judith Butler has called grievability, the way in which some people are more grievable than others. In a recent and controversial piece, Butler writes, if Palestinians are called animals, as Israel's defense minister insists, and if Israelis now represent the Jewish people, as Biden insists, collapsing the Jewish diaspora into Israel as reactionaries demand, then the only grievable people in the scene, the only ones who present as eligible for grief are the Israelis, for the scene of war is now staged between the Jewish people and the animals who seek to kill them. This racist framing of contemporary violence recapitulates the colonial opposition between the civilized one and the animals who must be routed or destroyed so as to preserve so-called civilization. I want to suggest that this racist and genocidal framing also distorts the imaginations of well-meaning people from the global North. Even well-intentioned friends of mine who do not identify as Zionists have difficulty imagining themselves in the position of Palestinians, whereas they can place themselves in the position of grieving parents whose children have been killed at a concert. This may have to do with the particular horrors of the United States, where such violence in public space is all too imaginable, whereas living under a blockade is not. This failure to relate as fully to Palestinian suffering may also have to do, as Gabriel Winant suggests, with the tight connection between mourning and statehood in Israel. As Winant writes, Israel is a machine for the conversion of grief into power. It transmutes grief into violence. And as Mona Chalabi has observed, we see that grief machine hard at work in the coverage of major newspapers like the New York Times. 2 points in conclusion. One, as academics, we may think that our task is to make people aware of things they don't already know, but is knowledge really the problem? Don't people know that Palestinians are suffering under a system of ongoing violence? What I'm suggesting here is that people can know something and not know it at the same time, or people can know it and feel very differently. They can know something but not relate to it. What can we do about that? Second, on a more salutary note, there's a huge discrepancy between older Americans and younger ones on the question of Palestine. I hope that some of the teach-ins will explore this discrepancy, a gap that may very well provide us with hope for new forms of solidarity in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Let me move now to invite Rochelle. We are just changing the order slightly, and because people have teaching obligations. Rochelle, please feel free to introduce yourself, and ahlan wa sahlan.
Merci. Thank you. My name is Rochelle Davis. I'm an associate professor of anthropology in the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University. And thank you for letting me jump the queue. I got to be in class at 2 o'clock. I wanted to start by really acknowledging the amazing resource of knowledge on this Zoom and use the idea of a resource to kind of think about my comments today, and following really on all the issues that Nora described before the film and Rana so beautifully kind of articulated. And then Lisa asked us to think about in this idea of knowing, and is knowing enough? I think that's a really hard question, Lisa. And I think one of the things that has been most challenging for us here at Georgetown has been to be asked to be that resource and knowledge support, and to try and do that for students, for faculty, for the university at large. At the same time, knowing that just knowing doesn't seem to be enough. And yet that is the one thing that we really can do, because that's our area of expertise. And I feel on some level, I am lucky to be at a university that has now produced a second statement around what is going on, and one that has been very keen to protect the freedom of speech. So let me just share briefly some of the ways that we've been approaching trying to bring resources to our community and outside. One of which is just to really organize educational resources, whether those are go up on whether those are Zooms and in-person meetings and all of those sorts of things on all different levels, and to provide spaces for people to organize in other kinds of ways. And it is that providing of space that we also are coming together and supporting each other, which has been a challenge. I think one of the other opportunities we've had, because I teach in an Arab studies program, is a lot of these issues that all of the faculty in our program are teaching regularly in our classes. And we've been able to take the space in classrooms to relate what we are teaching to what is going on in the world. I know a colleague last week was teaching Frantz Fanon by coincidence, and was really able to bring that into kind of thinking about some of the larger discussions of what was going on. Another colleague will be teaching Amal Beshara's book, Backstories, the US News Production and Palestinian Politics, which is an amazing book to kind of help students in the American context really think through media production and see very concrete examples of what is happening in the media that we are also aware of, but it gives students the tools to help them sort of think through and challenge some of these things. So I really just am here to support people, to reach out, to be open to sort of thinking together, and I'm here in solidarity with everyone, and I look forward to the continued work. I speak on behalf of my colleagues at CCAS, continue working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thanks very much. Adil, thanks for your graciousness for letting Rochelle go ahead. Please feel free to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My name is Adil Iskandar, and I am an associate professor of global communication at Simon Fraser University. And I'm also the director of the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies here. I want to start off by saying that I'm joining this call today from the unceded and stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. It's important to note that because as we recognize our own positionality and our desire to decolonize, we must first advocate for decolonization where we stand, if we expect it to happen in Palestine. And our allies in solidarity, the indigenous communities of Turtle Island, need to be marshaled in by being allowed to take and be part of this space. The I mean, honestly, so much has been said thus far by far more acute and brilliant colleagues than anything that I can share. But I will say a few points really quickly. And the first is that my center has unanimously voted to support the Middle Eastern Studies Association statement on Palestine, Israel incidents, conflict, continued erasure of Palestinian life. This is a statement that we understand has taken a significant amount of time to put out. I would encourage centers and institutes and departments and colleagues across both the continent and the world to read very carefully and consider endorsing, supporting, and circulating widely. But that statement speaks for many of us. I do want to also say a few things that speak to my area of research and interest, which is media and communication, that we're looking at a fairly consistent but much more muscular version of a media embargo on Palestinian lives and voices. Many of the people here on this call are themselves victims of precisely that action. Hamas, unfortunately, has become a convenient scapegoat to affirm and continue the erasure of Palestinian voices. They are serving as a convenient adversary and one that has translated and conveniently appropriated discourses of the war on terror. Everything that we've seen in the aftermath of 9/11, the equating of Hamas and ISIS. None of us have the time to really address those distinctions here, but I expect that they will be part of the conversation in these teachings forthcomingly. But in the meantime, the problem is that every conversation begins with a condemnation of Hamas. And while Hamas are condemned aplenty and everywhere and by everyone, it nevertheless becomes a chilling effect that helps frame Palestinians as merely Hamas and only Hamas. They can only be in that frame. The discussion around anti-Semitism and its appropriation and utilization and weaponization and securitization is something that has been mass-produced and manufactured, to use Herman and Chomsky's term to describe how media is appropriated. The access to local voices, not just from Gaza, but Palestinians in local communities, whether your local community is Chicago or New York or Vancouver or anywhere else, local voices that speak on behalf of or are Palestinians are actually blockaded completely from the media. They're not seen as credible by design, that their biases are intrinsic, and in doing so, they are effectively erased. The avoidance of live coverage from both Gaza and voices speaking live on air is a function of how the media edits and excises and commits violence against Palestinian voices or voices that will speak on behalf of Palestinian suffering. So there is a demonization in that editing process. And then finally, another point that I wanted to make is with regards to the obsession with presentism. This teaching is really all about, and many of the work that we've been doing, many of us have been doing, more so the other people on this call, has been about situating, historicizing, and placing things in context. And the media is obsessed with presentism. And the presentism is convenient, meaning that if yesterday or the day before there's an attack on a mosque or a church or a hospital in Gaza, then the frame shifts to another present or a future present. So the temporalities of the present are shifting depending on who happens to be seen conveniently as the victim at any given moment. I do want to say something about who we are in this place. Many of us have been trained as scholars and academics. Where we are most comfortable is in the classroom. I don't think I was trained to be able to provide sound bites and convenient, short, excised details that are convenient for the media to circulate and distribute. We are not the media. Having said that, we are being summoned to do the work that the media, both mainstream and in many instances alternative as well, are failing to do. And so in lieu of that, we are forced to break the embargo by making our voices available and present. The question is, will the media listen to the voices that we are offering and the many, many thousands, if not millions of other voices, not just in Gaza and in Palestine writ large, but in the Palestinian diaspora and the global solidarity movement. And then finally, I want to say that besides being academics and knowledge, providers, distributors, mediators, we are humans. We're parents, we're children, we are siblings, we are grandparents, we're grandchildren. And watching this unfold has been absolutely catastrophically devastating. So to be able to impart knowledge about this has been extremely difficult for all of us. And I just want to say that I acknowledge and I respect the incredible work being done under duress here, but also humbled by the much more intense work being done by journalists, reporters from Palestine, from Gaza, who are literally dying and being maimed and injured just to get the narrative out. And so we shouldn't have to be the ones amplifying those messages on our social media platforms. But if that's the only resource we have at our disposal, we will take it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Adil. Definitely, I don't believe you when you say that we're not trained for XYZ when you say it, in terms of speaking with the media and addressing matters in concise form. I really appreciate what everyone is saying here, and just want to remind everyone that we still have a few speakers, and we hope that people stick to the time. We will also deliberate whether and how much time we have for Q&A right after, which we can field from the YouTube feed. Maya, please feel free to introduce yourself. Maya Mekdashi.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be in this room together. My name is Maya Mekdashi. I'm an associate professor at Rutgers University in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies department. And I'm also the director for the Center of Middle East Studies at Rutgers University. So I'm going to be brief today. I know we are already sort of crunched for time. So I'm just going to speak briefly about settler time and using the framework of settler time to understand not only what is how Gaza and Palestine are being framed today in the United States, but also how our campuses are reacting and acting towards our students during this time. I think the problem here, one of the problems, and when you find yourself operating from within settler notions of time, is the problem of where to begin, when to begin. Anyone who begins on October 7th is operating within a settler understanding of time, a settler epistemology of time and of temporality. If you begin, and we see this everywhere, we see this in the news media, we see this in a kind of incitement to discourse and when it arises, and we see it on our college campuses with the endless sort of requests and how the university frames and treats our students, faculty, and staff in ways that do not understand at all that this is a 100-year history, and they keep churning events, and that this is a history, not a series of events. Now, I want to sort of suggest here that that the inability to frame Palestine outside of settler time is precisely because the United States is a settler empire, and we share in these ideological notions of temporality and of history. And the United States history is in fact built on choosing when to start. And once you choose when to start talking about colonialism and anti-colonialism, any anti-colonial action becomes framed within those notions of settler time. So an attack becomes a crime, a national liberation becomes terrorism, and this is the history of the United States. Really, if you look at the history, the settler history of the United States and Native resistance to colonization and genocide, we are in this framework now. And that is why, actually, some people, not everybody, some people do find it difficult to put themselves in the places of people who are living in Gaza today. And it is because they are settlers, that in fact, they can never put themselves in that position because they are involved and they are the beneficiaries of a concurrent settler project. I don't know what. Okay. Because certainly, and this is what it looks like on the campus of Rutgers University, many people can put themselves and can immediately understand the stakes of what is happening today in Palestine because it is their history. And I'm speaking here about Indigenous students, staff, faculty, and Black students, staff, and faculty. So the inability who you can see yourself as being in this kind of settler structure actually depends on your positionality within a settler colony. And I think here, when it comes to our universities, again, this should not surprise us because, as everyone talks about land acknowledgements, for example, our universities hold the bodies, bones, and skulls of Native and Black people who they turn into monuments and exhibitions of genocide to actually extract capital from. So all of these struggles are the same. We work within colonial universities and the struggle is the same, in fact. I want to sort of here end quickly to something that I keep sort of returning to, which is a quote by Fannie Lou Hamer, where she writes, "Nobody is free until everybody is free. And I am sick and tired of being sick and tired." And I also here just want to end and remind everybody that anger is a very generative political emotion, and that it is in fact what many fields of knowledge are rooted in, a sense of anger at the injustice of the colonial structure of the university itself, which we are seeing play out everywhere in multiple settler colonies, including Israel. Thank you. I'm going to end here.
Thank you, Maya. We are going to move to Rabab. Rabab, ahlan wa sahlan from Cairo, I assume. But,
no,
you're
unfortunately not from Cairo.
But please feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Rabab Al-Mahdi and I teach political science at the American University in Cairo. And yeah, I say unfortunately not from Cairo because this is, so for starters, I haven't prepared and I'm not as eloquent as any of those colleagues, who spoke before me. But I have some observations, I guess. And I also guess that the majority of the people watching this are, colleagues and students on American campuses, and I actually feel for you. I mean, I never thought there would be a time where I see this level of, where I understand that kind of subtle and microaggression and repression on American campuses. And the idea of not even censorship, but the idea of erasure and silencing taken full force in that way. So I think there's so many things that are troubling in what's going on. But the two things that I think as educators and as human beings I would like us to think about and see what can we do. One is, in parallel, I'm seeing the dehumanization of Palestinians, the demonization of Hamas, which I'm not defending, just for the record. It's just that this is being fed, and I loved the film that Noura started with, because it just shows you that regardless of Hamas, you know, there has been genocide. But with that, there's also a process of desensitization that we as academics, our students, and, you know, the informed public is going through. And there isn't anything more, I can't even find the word, but I think dehumanizing and desensitizing, like what Biden said in the presser after the hospital was destructed. His use of, and I'm quoting, the other team. Now I know it has been the other team. This very masculine, patriarchal image of a game where there are two teams and we have to be on the winning side. And those two older men are sitting there and just supporting each other in that game. So it was just the other team. So let's move on. And I think it's up to us. Lisa Wadeen made that excellent point about when we know, but we don't act, we don't really know, and the difference in generations. And as a kid, I actually majored in poli-sci because of being an activist, which was brought by the Palestinian First Intifada. And I had always wondered, you know, weren't there, you know, people around when 1948 happened? And how come they didn't react? How come that happened? You know, how come? And then, you know, so many things. Like when I see Khan Yunis being repeated again, like for me, Khan Yunis is a massacre that, you know, should not be repeated. When I see the same pictures of people leaving their homes and being forcefully displaced in a space, I've been to Gaza. There's no place for people to be displaced. We're not talking about, it's not a continent or a subcontinent where, oh, let's move from the south to the north. So for this to be happening again, and, you know, for us who actually have not witnessed that, but have read about it and saw it, you know, it's just like, how could this be repeated again? And I think and I'm going to stop here, but I think for very personal reasons of maintaining anything from our humanity all the way to freedom of expression on campuses, I think we need to be adamant about supporting what's going on in Gaza as part of Palestine, and making sure that what happened in 48 does not happen again on our collective watch. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabab. Nadia just joined us as she was delayed. But let's go with, if you don't mind, Nadia, just to give you a moment to just settle in. If we can go to Asle. And Asle, if you can please feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Asle Badi, and I'm here today on behalf of MESA, Middle East Studies Association Global Academy, which is a partnership of MESA and the City University of New York, and then also, of course, in my own vein as a scholar. And as I was thinking about what to say, and I just want to echo Rabab, that the eloquence and the brilliance of those who've already spoken basically leaves little to say other than, from my own perspective, what this moment calls upon me to do as someone who is trying to act in solidarity. And so the question is, why have I felt so paralyzed. What are these feelings of defeat and what can we do with them? How do we turn it into the kind of generative and productive anger that Maya Mikdashi spoke of? First, like, what are we mourning? And there's at least I can speak for myself, some quarter century, I was in a room of law students trying to give them some ideas about what a practice looks like in this moment. And they were introducing themselves and they were saying, I'm a 1L, I'm a 2L, meaning they're a first year student, a second year student. And I said, you know what, I feel like I should say I'm a 27L or something, like I'm still in the place, still trying to invent the wheel, asking how is it possible that we're in this room back again, asking these questions of what is a practice going to be? And part of it is the feeling of, a quarter century of work for those of us who are in the global north. What are we called to do? We're called to take the extraordinary resources that have been made available to us, the totally contingent and conjunctural reasons why we have these opportunities, and to use them with all of the intentionality we can muster to the best of our abilities to actually impact the things that drove us into these positions. And in the case of scholars, drove us to think that the most effective thing we can do in this moment is knowledge production. And how can we do that knowledge production work? What are we called to do with the work we have tried to do to this point? And what can we do? How can we pivot? What can we change about our practice going forward? And what lies at the heart of that is solidarity, to my mind. So the first thing that this space makes clear is that we have the resources of solidarity amongst ourselves. We built some things that are reflected in this Zoom room and that are reflected in the call that is sent out 48 hours ago, and everybody shows up and makes the time and decides that this is worth engaging with. So the first thing for me has been to refocus on what is resilient and stands and how we can deploy that. Because no one on this call, no one anywhere has the luxury of allowing ourselves to feel defeated or allowing ourselves to feel despair in the face of the despair and the dread and the annihilationist violence that those we have tried so hard to build some bridges of solidarity to are now confronted with. Has our attempt at solidarity failed to protect them? Absolutely. Are we living in places for those of us who are in the global north that are directly complicit in the violence to which they are being exposed? Absolutely. Does that require a level of introspection of what our practice is and must be going forward? Again, from my perspective, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I'm here now in this moment. And the question still I'm confronted with is, what does solidarity look like for me to do? And what are the things I know how to do? What is my skill set and what can I bring to this equation? We've heard incredible analysis already, and we have historians amongst us who can provide the contextual frame that's necessary to disrupt the settler temporality. We have a couple of lawyers amongst us here. This is the master's tools, right? This is a basic set of an arsenal, a toolkit that we can try to deploy, knowing our deconstructive critique of it, and knowing that even a reconstructive account of what international law can do understands that these are the tools that have enabled erasure in the first place. But what can we do? What is the starting point from which we can try to build something effective right now? And so what do I find myself doing? Crafting statements, writing letters, mobilizing the resources of legitimacy that elite institutions provide and that certain kinds of voices can have to get them to say something better. So what does that ultimately mean? It means trying the same thing all of us have named, to somehow shift narratives, to say that decolonizing is not an aesthetic. It's not some practice that's about curricula. It has to mean something more, and actually thinking about what is the pedagogical practice that enables a younger, much more radicalized generation to actually think clearly about what that might mean, given that they do not have a lived experience of anti-colonial resistance that's global, which is where these tools, where the Fanon analysis has come from, but they have no means of knowing. They are born into a world of war on terror. They're born into a world, the master narrative of which was produced in the 1990s by the very person who is the statesman today in Israel that is overseeing the re-weaponization of this framework for the purposes of extermination. How do we furnish them with the tools to understand this, not just with theoretical frameworks, but with practical knowledge that can be applied in the world? So I feel like that's the thing I'm being called to think about. And any answer I give is imperfect. It is fundamentally, intrinsically, necessarily imperfect because it's all a process, not an event. And I am in the process inventing it as I go. We're all in the process of it, trying to invent as we go. So I think like the most I can do on any given day, instead of giving in, is to say, I did what I could do today. And being here present with all of you is one piece of doing what we can do today. And then thinking together and using this as a moment and any other gathering we can be in, whether in person or virtually, to fashion new tools or accelerate the ones we have to think about what is this moment calling on us to do generationally, whichever position, wherever we are in our generational place situation with respect to that conflict and with respect to resistance, and what toolkit do I bring to the possibilities of resistance? And for that, for this space and for the ability to think together about that, I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Asli. Before we move on, let me just make two quick comments. The first is I apologize about the audio with the film. This was a setting issue. I take full responsibility for it. But we are promising that we are going to re-air the entire film more properly with all of the subtitles involved. And hopefully Noura will be able to join us to address any questions and questions sometime in the future. The second point is a lot of people are asking, and we have hundreds of viewers, which is really encouraging, but many are asking about our resources. We will actually be putting together, just as we did in the 10 years on project commemorating 10 years of the anniversary of the uprising, we will be putting together a portal of resources that include a vast array. So this will be happening as the teachings continue. Nadia, I hope that you are rested and settled. It's all you, and everyone is actually introducing themselves and the way they wish.
Thank you, Bassam. And it's wonderful to be part of this group and to be part of the global community that I know is watching. And my apologies for being late. I was unavoidably delayed. I am speaking as a member of the faculty in the history department at Georgetown University in Qatar. And my students find themselves at a very interesting position of tension, some of which dovetails, I think, with the students of all the faculty members that are on this call, and some of which might be a little bit different. And that is that for the students who are, at least I will just speak for the students that I teach at Georgetown and that I know who are taking classes with other colleagues of mine who are active and interested and available on this topic, which is that they are, on the one hand, been erased, like so many of our students on other campuses, by the statements that the home campuses have issued over the last week. These are students, of course, like who are Palestinian, but in general come from over 80 nations around the world, who and feel that their sense of community and membership in the broader campus, the global campus community at Georgetown and others, has not been accounted for, has been completely ignored and completely denigrated. And so are looking for spaces of solidarity, are looking for spaces of legibility, both within the larger sort of national and regional space, and they're finding them here to a large extent. But I think an opportunity like this teach-in and the global community that's watching is offering another one. So I really hope that our students are watching this, and I will certainly send the recording on to them. And on the other hand, unlike many of my colleagues and friends who are teaching, particularly in the United States, I am teaching in a largely pro-Palestinian, very friendly political context for the most part. So what I'm finding, however, is that the students, almost entirely are on sort of are politically on the right side of history, are on the right side of this political issue, but do not have scaffolding, do not have the sort of intellectual or historical infrastructure that they can draw upon. And so they're, on the one hand, feeling erased by the sort of a larger community that includes the main campus, but includes the larger sort of academic community, and on the other hand, want to respond to it, but don't necessarily have the tools. And this includes students themselves who have lived through similar colonial and decolonial contexts like Palestine, but don't necessarily know the actual history or the historical narrative or know the theoretical frameworks upon which to draw. And so
I'm hoping that this and the series of teach-ins that we're doing is going to offer that tool. And alongside what you were mentioning, Bassam, one of the things that we're doing at GUQ is also involving students sort of informally to put together resources that they find helpful. And so maybe that's something that we can also cross-reference with each other in ways that are helpful to everyone. And lastly, I want to follow up from Maya's point on anger and just read very quickly. There's been a post that's been going around, which I have found to be incredibly motivating and captures so much, I think, of what we're feeling. And it's this post that, as I understand it, has been written by Khadija Dajani on qahr. Qahr, there is no English equivalent to the Arabic word qahr. The dictionary says anger, but it's not. It is when you take anger, place it on a low fire, add injustice, oppression, racism, dehumanization to it, and leave it to cook slowly for a century. And then you try to say it, but no one hears you. So it sits in your heart, and it settles in your cells, and it becomes your genetic imprint. And then it moves through generations. And one day you find yourself unable to breathe. It washes over you and demands to break out of you. You weep, and the cycle repeats. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. We're left with two more speakers, and we will start with Ziad, who actually put the sort of contours on the order and topics that we are discussing today, and we'll end with Shireen Sayali. So let's go to Ziad, and please introduce yourself the way you like.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ziad Abu-Rish, and I'm a faculty member at Bard College in upstate New York, and also a core member of the Arab Studies Institute. And I'm humbled to be in this group of people and in the broader network of audience and the mobilizations that are happening right now. Having heard all that we did, it's very hard to say anything in addition. I would like to reflect briefly on the moment we're in as far as Palestine solidarity activism is concerned. We're at a time where we're seeing unconditional government support in the US and elsewhere, with few exceptions, to what Israel is doing to the Palestinian population. Mainstream media in the United States and Western Europe have effected a blackout on critical voices, at least relative to previous years. And we are seeing the closure of spaces of dissent and expressions of solidarity, both on campuses in the United States, but also in places like Berlin and Germany more broadly, for example, where students that utter the word Free Palestine can be reported to the police for investigation. That is the degree to which we are seeing a crackdown on Palestine solidarity. But I want to challenge us to not view this as a setback in the sense of the work that the Palestine solidarity movement has been doing over the decades having been undone. And I say this with great humility and great trepidation also, because I'm saying this in the face of crimes against humanity, and genocidal intent and mass displacement and all sorts of other horrors that the Israeli government is perpetrating on the Palestinian people in Gaza elsewhere. But I do think it's important to situate this crackdown not just as a traditional form of supporting the Israeli government by these entities, but also as a new strategy to compete with the reality of a much broader based Palestine solidarity movement in the United States and in other places, and a much broader sentiment of Palestine solidarity. I agree that people can know and not know. I think what we're starting to see is a delayed catching up by many people that were silent in the first few days as they got their bearings, but they have all gone back to the basics. They are all mobilizing. They are all speaking out. And I don't think that necessarily means we will be able to stop what Israel is intending to do in Gaza. And I say that with a great sense of dread and guilt. But I also don't think that was the movement we were building, to use that as a litmus test of whether our movement has failed or not. We could go back to the drawing board and think about whether we want to build a movement that is capable of stopping a war machine in a moment like this, a genocidal intent and genocidal machine in a moment like this. But the movement we built is a long-term movement of solidarity, of standing in principle, of speaking truth to power, and of mobilizing. And in that sense, there is no setback. And unfortunately, the community that is bearing the brunt of the setback are the Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere, are the 48 refugees that are being displaced for a second time, being set up in new UN refugee camps and tents as a new Nakba unfolds. So again, I don't say this with any kind of pride. I don't declare any kind of victory or any wins, but I do think we need to strategically assess where we are as Palestine solidarity activists. And I know sometimes we wear hats to speak as Palestinian activists, but right now I'm wearing the solidarity hat and say that there is a lot we can do and a lot we are doing, and time will tell. Not settler time, but our time. Thank you.
Shukran, Ziad. We're not going to have time for Shireen to speak. I think Palestinians have actually been overrepresented in the media.
I think that's my cue.
Shireen, that's your cue, our tour de force. Please feel free to introduce yourself. Ahlan wa sahlan.
My name is Shireen Saikali. I teach at UCSB, and I'm here representing myself. I am Palestinian, and like all Palestinians, I am a product of the Nakba. I speak to you today from unceded and stolen Chumash territory, the grounds upon which genocide has happened and continues to happen. I honor today the movements on this land, from the movement for Black Lives to Standing Rock to Mauna Kea. Yesterday, we woke to the newest tent city for Palestinian people under the most recent incident of ongoing dispossession. Today, we woke to images of Palestinians unearthing the bodies of their loved ones from under the rubble of Israeli destruction. In the last hour, as we were here together, Israel has sent a warning of evacuation to Al-Quds Hospital, whose doctors and staff insist they cannot leave the injured or safely evacuate them without time, safe passage, and fuel. They have sent another warning to 5 UNRWA schools in Gaza City housing displaced Palestinians. As we witness the annihilation of Palestinians in that part of Palestine we now call the Gaza Strip, as we face the realities of genocide in real time, we in the Shatat are summoned into multiple necropolitical traps. Calls come from the media, from well-meaning colleagues, even from friends. Sometimes the call goes like this: we're scared to speak. We do not know how to speak. Teach us how to speak. Better yet, can't you just speak? That's the good version. More often, the call is more brutal. Can you give the Gaza side of the war on Hamas? The very framework of this question, of course, rests on structures of violence and erasure. And so we remind people, Gaza is not an island. History did not begin on October 7. This is not a war on Gaza alone or Hamas alone. This is a war on Palestine and the Palestinians. And so the siren continues. Could you give our audience some tools? Could you, in short, provide evidence that you are human, that you are not a barbarian? Could you tell us your history? We believe you have one, but we just don't know where to find it. Who are the people of Gaza? One well-meaning group recently asked me, after recounting how much they had engaged with our collective work, what about those Israeli Arabs? Have we not explained for the last 20 years just how brutally colonial that term is? They are not Israeli Arabs. They are Palestinians. we explain yet again. Gaza is not an island. History did not begin on October 7. This is a war on Palestine and the Palestinians. The demand to evidence and the demand to testify constitute a politics of laziness, negligence, denial, and erasure. It is in each iteration a site of repetitive trauma. And yet, despite that, we do the labor once again, compiling yet more toolkits, primers, resources, bibliographies, timelines, slides, maps, poetry, films, art. Again and again, we testify, I deserve to live on the land of my ancestors. I deserve not to be bombed while getting treatment at a hospital. My parents, who survived 1948, deserve to not witness this escalation of the ongoing Nakba, an escalation bolstered by a tower of Western artillery, of precise weapons and vicious language. We will never stop fighting. We will never be silent. We may need to think about the terms of our intervention. We may need to work in shifts. We may need time to grieve. And along the way, we heed the message from London and Lima, from Beirut and Bogota, from Athens and Amman, from Cairo and Tunis, from DC and Jakarta. Palestine one day will be free.
I guess we are all on mute. Thank you, Shireen. Thanks to everyone. We are way out of time. I'd like to say that this will continue. We will be having other teach-ins on a weekly basis that will probably feature, and definitely feature actually, less than the numbers we have today, and we will be going in depth into various topics. We will announce these in due time in all of the participating universities and research center. I'd like to simply acknowledge the person with whom us at the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason and the Arab Studies Institute were speaking with early on to put something together, and that is Fida Adli, the director of the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University. I would like to thank her for pushing this forward with us and kind of together working to assemble this array of remarkable human beings and organizations and institutions. So thanks to her and thanks to all. We are unfortunately not going to be able to have a Q&A session because everybody has to leave like right now. So I should actually conclude quickly. Thank you all again. We've had a lot of questions online. I hope I actually saved questions and saved some of the comments that we can address later. Thank you all for being here. And if there is anyone here who would like to say anything, please speak now. Otherwise, we're going to conclude this first installment of Gaza and Context, the collaborative teach-in series.
Thank you. Thank you. شيرين بنحبك. تصبح على خير.
كتير كتير. باي.
سلام.